Welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping right into the historical origins of the Islamic State back in the 7th century, and we're going to look at this entirely objectively, essentially as a masterclass in rapid state building and structural engineering. We aren't focusing on mythology or basic tribal history here. Instead, we're looking at how a highly complex government was literally built from the sand up. So let's get right into it.
Here is the blueprint for our analysis today. 1. Transforming Yathrib. 2. Defining a true state. 3. The 5 core institutions. 4. The architecture of governance. And finally, 5. From city-state to empire.
Section 1. Transforming Yathrib into Medina. To truly grasp the sheer scale of this achievement, we first have to look at the raw materials Prophet Muhammad started with when he migrated, the Hijra, in 622 CE.
The contrast here is just stark. Before 622, the city of Yathrib was basically a collection of warring tribes. They were bound by nothing but asabiya, which is strict tribal loyalty and tribal law. But the Prophet completely overhauled those old confederations. He renamed the city Al-Madina Al-Munawwara and unified this deeply fractured society under a totally new bond of brotherhood and a single divine law, the Sharia. So instead of people just blindly following their local tribal chiefs, they were suddenly plugged into a cohesive, centralized structure with a unified vision.
Section 2. Defining a true state. Now, this kind of rapid, almost overnight transformation actually brings up a really fascinating academic debate about what this new political entity even was.
It's a critical question. Was Medina actually a state? This is heavily debated because the word dola, which literally translates to state in modern Arabic, well, it wasn't used that way back then. In the early Islamic period, dola actually meant a turn of fortune or a turn in power. It wasn't until centuries later, during the Abbasid period, that the word evolved to mean a state or dynasty as we understand it today.
Because of that linguistic shift, some 20th century modernist scholars argued that Medina wasn't a state at all. For instance, in 1925, Ali Abdel Razak claimed that Islam doesn't advocate a specific form of government. He argued that the Prophet's administrative assignments were just completely ad hoc and temporary. Basically, his view was that there were no permanent institutions, just a charismatic leader who occasionally handed out limited tasks like leading a prayer or commanding a small troop.
But hold on, because that view was heavily and systematically refuted by the senior scholars at Al-Azhar University. 24 senior scholars reached a unanimous agreement that Abdel Razak was historically off base. They went step by step to prove Medina functioned exactly like a true body politic. It had a defined people, the Ummah. It had a specific territory. It operated under unified laws with a supreme executive authority. Plus, it regularly exercised standard state functions. We're talking national defense, the administration of justice, and foreign diplomacy.
Section 3. The 5 core institutions. To prove this beyond just theological debates, we can actually map Medina's history straight onto modern political science criteria for statehood.
Let's run this through historian Fred Donner's 5 criteria for a state. It's like a checklist, and Medina hits every single one. First, a governing group? Yes, led by the Prophet and his secretaries. An army and internal police? Absolutely. They had organized patrols. A functioning judiciary to settle disputes? Check. A tax administration? They collected centralized taxes on agriculture and trade to fund the government. And finally, state administrators, like market inspectors. The Prophet successfully built independent institutions to manage the law, the economy, and social order.
Section 4. The architecture of governance. When we zoom in on this institutional framework, the absolute complexity of Medina's administration becomes super clear.
The Prophet was not just ruling solo. He constructed a massive executive branch. He appointed a huge array of officials for highly specialized jobs. Think about it. Wazirs acting as deputy leaders, Kutab working as private scribes, specialized inspectors keeping the markets fair, land surveyors, regional judges, and even media representatives. And in 7th century Arabia, those were the poets. This completely shattered the old system where people only answered to local tribal elders.
Now, you might be asking, how do you staff a massive new bureaucracy when your people have been nomadic for centuries? Well, the answer is the Tarbiyah program. This was an incredibly rigorous, intentional training system meant to prep his companions for governing. A prime example is Zayd ben Thabit. He was put in charge of foreign correspondence and actually learned Hebrew in just 15 days. Literally 15 days. That wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate capacity-building program designed to make sure the state could survive long after its founder.
And this whole architecture was rolled out in very deliberate phases.
At first, as head of state, Muhammad held all executive and judicial power in Medina, but as step 2 kicks in, territorial expansion, he started methodically decentralizing. By step 3, he's sending figures like Ali ibn Abi Talib to be a regional judge in the newly acquired province of Yemen. He was actively, practically teaching his companions the complex skills needed to rule a massive, diverse population.
Section 5. From city-state to empire. This rock-solid foundation set the stage for what is honestly one of the most unprecedented political expansions in human history.
Looking at the timeline, the state gets its footing in 622. But the real catalyst, the thing that sparks the explosion from a state into an empire, was the 628 CE Treaty of Hudaybiyah. This treaty finally gave the Muslims a decade of security. More importantly, it forced their main rivals, the Quraysh, to give them official political recognition.
So, why was this specific treaty such a big deal? Because of one crucial clause. It stated that any third party wanting to ally with Muhammad could do so without any retaliation from the Quraysh. This was an absolute game-changer diplomatically. It meant Medina could form independent alliances all over the Arabian Peninsula. It also gave the Prophet the diplomatic runway to send letters to the major global superpowers of the time, like the Roman and Persian empires.
The results of this structural and diplomatic boom were just staggering. Look at this growth. In 622 CE, the initial census of Medina showed a military capacity of around 1,500 fighters. Less than 10 years later, by the expedition to Tabuk, that number had absolutely skyrocketed to a standing force of 30,000 soldiers. That is a 20-fold increase. And this wasn't some loose raiding party. This was a highly disciplined, state-run military machine.
As this massive force marched, even former enemies were just left in absolute awe of what had been built from scratch. Take Abu Sufyan, a former staunch enemy. Watching this military pass by, he actually said, "By Allah, the kingdom of your nephew has become truly great this morning." It was just an undeniable, real-time recognition that Medina was no longer a makeshift settlement of refugees. It was a sovereign, formidable power.
All of this leaves us with a truly remarkable question to think about. How did these foundational institutions, built in a fractured nomadic desert society, end up being engineered so flawlessly that they supported a multi-ethnic, intercontinental civilization for over 1,000 years? It completely rewrites our modern understanding of statecraft and institutional durability. I mean, think about it. The administrative training, the delegation of power, the unified rule of law. This was a blueprint so robust it echoed through 1,300 years of history. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the architecture of the history around you.